Hi, it's Penny here, and today I wanted to talk to you about the top 10 fantasy books that I read in the year of 2024. I maybe could have done just top 5, so I talk about the best of the best, but I decided to do top 10, so I can pretty much just tell you about every good fantasy book that I read this year. So first up, we have Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians by Brandon Sanderson. So I read the whole series this year. And this is a middle grade series that is kind of silly. In fact, when I say kind of, I don't think I should be saying kind of, but this is a very silly series. We are following this boy named Alcatraz, who is an orphan, and he discovers that he is part of this family from another secret part of the world. So it turns out that the evil librarians have been keeping these other countries in the world a secret from the rest of us, and that certain people from this other country have these kind of magical abilities, but they're more like fundamental flaws. Like, for example, one of these characters' magical abilities is that they can fall over. It just happens that usually when they will fall over, it will be done in a way where it somehow works out for the best. There's also another character that's really bad at math, a character who always wakes up ugly. I think a character that always forgets things, like all those kind of things. At the same time, it's kind of like this big epic battle against the dark powers of the world. So Alcatraz the orphan ends up being very pivotal in this bigger battle that's going on. As I said, it's very silly. There's a lot of puns, a lot of really stupid jokes. However, I know with some of Sanderson's other more adult works like Mistborn Era 2 or The Frugal... What's it called? The Frugal Wizard's Handbook to Surviving Medieval England. Like, I know with those I have complained a bit about Sanderson's humor or use of humor, but actually I think it worked really well for a kid's book, and I had a really good time with Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians. I maybe wish that I had spread the series out a little bit, because I do think at times it got a little bit too much, and if I'd spread it out, maybe it wouldn't have been as overwhelming. But still, a really fun series, and I'm glad I read it. Then at number 9, we have Sanctuary by Alona Andrews. So this is just a little short novella in the Kate Daniels world, following this side character, Roman, who is like a dark priest for the evil god Chernobog. There are a lot of conversations in this novella about the definition of evil, and I really like how we managed to have this dark priest doing some quite heroic things. So basically in the short story, this young boy turns up on his doorstep and begs for sanctuary, and then these other guys all turn up hunting this young boy, and so Roman has to protect him. And I do feel like with this short story that it's hinting at a future romance, because the Kate Daniels world, even though it's kind of a post-apocalyptic urban fantasy with a lot of plot beyond the romance, there is always kind of a central romance to all of Alona Andrews' stuff. So there was a little hint of that, and I do wonder if the plan is to write more of Roman's story in the future, which I wouldn't be against, because I always have a great time with Alona Andrews stuff. I just love the way that they approach plot lines. There's a lot of momentum and action, but still like a lot of philosophy and thought to the way that the characters are acting. A lot of great mythology. Also in Sanctuary, Roman kind of has these little animal creature type things, dark animal familiars or something, kind of hanging out with him, wanting to be around him and being a part of the plot. And I thought those were super cute. I actually think the story could be a really great animated movie type thing, because I would love to see those little creatures animated. But also, I should say, I think this is a terrible place to start with the Kate Daniels world. So if you've read Kate Daniels, which you should, because I love it. If you've read Kate Daniels, then you will want to read this. If you haven't read Kate Daniels, this is not the place to start, but you should try it if you're at all open to urban fantasy type things. This is the part of my list where I start doubting my ordering that Past Me has put together, and so we once again will say, like I did with my top 10 graphic novels, that on a different day, in a different mood, the ordering could be different for this top 10 list. But number 8, we have the Age of Madness trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. So I started reading the First Law World last year, but this year I did read all of the Age of Madness trilogy, starting with A Little Hatred, and then... damn it, I thought the front of the book might tell me, so I didn't have to rely on my memory. A Little Hatred, The Trouble with Peace, and The Wisdom of Crowds. So this trilogy is set at the end of Joe Abercrombie's First Law World. It's a grimdark series, and as with all of Joe Abercrombie's works, it's written with kind of quite a dark sense of humor. We're following different characters in this world where kind of different kingdoms are at war with each other. Also, particularly in this trilogy, we have kind of an uprising of the people, and we're looking at the way that that is dealt with, both good and the bad. A lot of bad, to be honest. Now, I personally didn't like this final trilogy as much as I liked the original First Law trilogy. I actually didn't like the amount of romance. I know I just had in my previous spot a romance book, or a book that had a significant romance aspect. But you know what? I actually think there was more romance. When I say romance, I mean it wasn't particularly romance, but this had more romantic elements, or like couple interactions, than Sanctuary did. Anyway, I didn't like some of those. I was just kind of annoyed by the whole thing, the way the relationships were working. But they weren't necessarily badly written. I think I just found this book series a little bit repetitive. However, I still love Joe Abercrombie's writing and his humor, and I still think the way he creates characters does make them feel very real and relatable, even though they're like not great people a lot of the time. So I think along the way I have criticized this book series quite a bit, but like I still liked it quite a lot, and I can see why people like it. I just kind of wished it was as good for me as the first trilogy in the series was. Then at number 7 we have When Among Crows by Veronica Roth, and yes, that's Veronica Roth who wrote the Divergent trilogy. But this book is very different. So in this, Veronica Roth is exploring her Polish ancestry. So it's very inspired by Polish mythology. And we kind of have a bunch of characters who are sort of Polish vampires, who eat more like emotions, certain kinds of emotions rather than blood. So in this story, we start by following one guy who is attempting to obtain a magical item so that he can make a deal with Baba Yaga, and then he does kind of like bring on side a couple of other characters. And I think a strength of the story was those relationships and the way that it used the mythology to kind of express the emotions around it. As well, parts of it were really beautifully written. The only thing I remember finding a little bit strange is because it was such beautiful writing, but also had some big action scenes, and I didn't feel like the two necessarily meshed so well, and I wish we'd had actually a little bit less action and just more of this beautiful Polish mythology. But still, I think this was a really beautiful book, but I do kind of wish it had been a little bit longer as well. Then at number 6, we have Fate of the Argosy by Sebastian de Castell. So this is the final book in a trilogy, which is a prequel trilogy to the Spellslinger series by Sebastian de Castell. So in the Spellslinger series, the main character is mentored by this woman named Furious Parfax. And this prequel is Furious Parfax's kind of backstory. And the Argosy are like these traveling philosophers in some ways, that kind of have a kind of magic, which is not so much magic, but more different approaches to life, which I really did like learning more about in this book series. As well, in the Spellslinger series, Sebastian de Castell basically manages to have like a different kind of magic be the focus of each book, and he has continued that in the Argosy trilogy. Also, this series can be very humorous at times, although it does deal with some very dark themes. This final book was very focused around the genocide that has been happening in the world of the series, and kind of focuses on making a plan for the few remaining survivors of that genocide. I wasn't entirely happy with the direction that went in, and as a result, I don't think this was my favorite book of the trilogy, but I still really love the trilogy as a whole, and I still do actually think this book is quite good. It's one of these ones where it was really good, and I think with a little more work it could have been amazing. So it's at number 6, not quite in my top 5, but like very good. And I see a lot more people talking about the Spellslinger series and like almost no one talking about the Argosy trilogy, and I think You can read the Argosy trilogy without reading the Spellslinger series, and I actually think the Argosy series is better. Then at number 5, we have Dark One Forgotten by Brandon Sanderson and Dan Wells. So this has only been released in audiobook format, and that makes a lot of sense because it's told in podcast style. So we are introduced to the podcast, and it is this girl talking about this violin player that she has discovered, where basically this violin player had a massive amount of success, and then it seems like everyone just forgot about her overnight. And so this podcast is trying to investigate why was that. And I mean, I can't tell you anything about why it is because that would be spoilers, but it does have some links into Sanderson's Dark One graphic novel. Although, to be honest, by the time I read this podcast, I'd mostly forgotten any of the details of that graphic novel, but I don't really think you need to know. All you need to know is that there is going to be some links into a fantastical world, but it's written in such a realistic way that it doesn't really feel like a fantasy. Even if there are fantastical elements, it almost feels a little bit more sci-fi. And I have actually heard that the best parts of this book are more due to Dan Wells, or more similar to some of Dan Wells' stuff, so I probably need to pick up some more of Dan Wells' work because I really enjoyed this. I thought the pacing was so great. Like, once I started listening to this, I didn't want to stop. I just had to know how this investigation was going to play out. And I think it did such a great job of like portraying the action scenes, which I imagine would be very difficult to do because it's trying to capture like these characters recording action happening to them, but it doesn't want them to like say, or like, you can't have the characters describing what's happening to them. So you have to somehow, through their dialogue, express what's happening to them. And I think it did it really well. And I also think the audiobook narrators did a really great acting job. So I would definitely recommend this one. I think the audiobook is fairly short as well, so not too much of a time investment. Then at number 4, we have Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. And this book was just so deliciously strange. I kind of want to frame it as like a cozy horror fantasy because it starts out with us being introduced to this shapeshifter and kind of their experience of childhood when they are born with their other siblings in the body of their father, which they then consume. And in fact, this shapeshifter eats their siblings. But the way it's written is so cozy because the shapeshifter looks back on this experience as like a warm and nurturing childhood. And throughout this book, it kind of manages so often to frame these really awful things as kind of nice, although there are a fair amount of awful things happening. So we're following this shapeshifter. She is kind of some kind of gooey blob type thing that can absorb other items and use them to like give structure to their body. But there is this family that has blamed them for killing other members of their family and is now trying to track this shapeshifter down and kill them. Our shapeshifter meets one of this family and kind of falls in love with them because they're a really nice and wonderful, caring person. And they start thinking about maybe they could build a nest in this person that they're falling in love with, because that's what they think you do when you fall in love with someone. But they still have to deal with the fact that they are being blamed for this murder that they didn't actually commit. Although they have committed murder at other times in the past. It's kind of twisted and weird. There are maybe parts of the plot where it didn't entirely make sense. It was a little bit simplistic. Also parts of the plot that deal a lot with like domestic abuse and familial abuse, which could be difficult to read at times. But I kind of liked the way that it used this shape-shifting to bring everything together. And there were some cool twists and turns along the way. Honestly, I had a great time with it. Like, just some parts were so weird and disturbing, but in that kind of way where you're like, oh, this is so great. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Then at number 3, we're going to have The Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. So this year I reread the first 3 books in the series, and then I read Rhythm of War. I am currently in the process of reading Wind and Truth, so I don't think I'm going to finish it this year. We're not going to count it. So I guess we're putting Rhythm of War at number 3, although I'm struggling to put my thoughts together specifically for Rhythm of War, given that I'm halfway through Wind and Truth. But this is just like this very big epic fantasy, which by book 4, like with every book being this thick, things have gone in a very different direction. We're kind of following different characters as these magical powers come back into the world. There's also kind of a bigger conflict going on between these different races, so the humans and also these other human type creatures that they have found. And throughout the series we kind of learn a lot about that conflict and a lot about the magic in the world, and a lot. There's a lot going on. And this book especially was very scientific. There's at least one plot thread that's very scientific in the way that we're learning about the magic. And I enjoyed that, although I will admit at times I really struggled with that transition between where reality stopped. Like, where did the science stop being science and start being fantasy? Kind of hard to tell at times, or like a bit of a stretch for my brain. But there are some really great character arcs going on, and just the bigger mythology of the world and the way that the magic works is really interesting. And I really enjoyed my reread of the series, but I also enjoyed the continuation in Rhythm of War. I mean, if you like big epic fantasy, you've probably already got an opinion about this. And maybe next year, once I've had time to process Wind and Truth, I will put together some kind of series review for that series, although it's going to be a lot. Then at number 2, we have On the Edge by Alona Andrews. So this is the first book in a quartet. I have actually read the first and second books in the quartet, and I'm currently reading book 3, but once again, I don't expect to finish it by the end of the year. But also book 2, I didn't like as much as book 1, so we're just going to count the first book for this top 10. This is set in a world where we have the Broken, which is our world and has no magic. We also have the Weird, which has a lot of magic. And then in between the two is the Edge, which is kind of this dimension you can use to travel between the two. And only certain people can enter the Edge. And the Edge kind of has just a little bit of magic. And a lot of the people who live on the Edge are kind of really struggling. In the first book, On the Edge, we're following Rose, whose mother has died and her father has just gone off on some kind of adventure. So she's trying to look after her 2 younger brothers. Unfortunately, because she was born on the Edge, she doesn't have any proper documentation for the Broken. And people on the Edge kind of really struggle with the whole nobility thing going on in the Weird. So she's just trying to work at crappy jobs, kind of as like an illegal immigrant in the Broken, to try and support her brothers. Her brothers also have their own magical abilities. One of them has necromancy powers and the other one is kind of like a shapeshifter. And Rose herself also has this very strong magical ability that has drawn a lot of unwanted attention to her. And so then this guy from the Weird ends up coming along, and there is a bit of a romance, because these are the kind of books that always have a romantic plot thread, but there is also kind of a bigger storyline in there about these strange magical creatures that are hanging around. So I really loved the characters in this series, as well as the plot just had so much momentum and came together in such a satisfying way. And I also actually liked the romance in this one. I'm not normally someone who really gets into romance, but somehow the way that Alona Andrews does it normally works really well for me. So in some ways I feel like, because this isn't a big sprawling epic fantasy, I feel a little bit weird about putting it above the Stormlight Archives, but also I just had so much fun with this book and I felt so emotionally invested. And to some degree, I think I just liked how focused the book was. So in the end, that's why I decided to put it above the Stormlight Archives, or specifically above Rhythm of War. And if you like urban fantasy, I think you could like On the Edge. Then at number 1, we have the Soldier Sun trilogy by Robin Hobb. So I have loved The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. And when I heard about the Soldier Sun trilogy, I saw that it didn't have as high of an average rating on Goodreads. And as well, a lot of people talked about its problematic elements, so I was a little bit hesitant going into it. However, I ended up really loving it. And I think if you're someone who has read the Fitz books in The Realm of the Elderlings and you have loved Fitz and haven't found him annoying at all, I know some people definitely find him annoying. I think if you haven't found him annoying, you could definitely love the Soldier Sun trilogy. And the reason I say that is because the main character is kind of annoying in a similar-ish way to Fitz from The Realm of the Elderlings. So, in the Soldier Sun trilogy, it's a completely separate world. It's kind of like an alternate colonial America. We're following Navarre, who is the soldier son. So in this world, second sons are always soldiers. Navarre is actually the soldier son of a soldier son. So his father was also a soldier, although he's now been promoted to be a noble himself. And there's a big theme in this about the new nobles being somewhat up against the old nobles. But also, of course, I said this was an alternate colonial America, so Navarre's people have come in, and there are also the native people of this land who have some kind of magic, but it can be taken away by iron. There's actually two kind of native peoples that have already been at conflict with each other. There are these other people that live kind of in the north in the forest that the other native people kind of blame for having taken away their magic, or I don't want to go too much into spoilers, but there's a conflict there as well. Navarre ends up kind of being pulled into the magic of this world, even though he really just wants to be a really good soldier son. But he gets pulled into this magic, and then so many tragic, awful things happen to him. He tries so hard throughout this whole series to do the right thing, and it often doesn't turn out the best for him. I have actually done a whole separate series review for this, which I will link. I think you can expect a lot of what you get from other Robin Hood books, so a lot of slow-paced, character-focused, like exploration of the different themes. I really loved in this book series how Robin Hood wove the themes throughout the story. Like, this trilogy just had me thinking about so many things, but also like feeling so many things. And while it might not have had the full epicness of The Realm of the Elderlings, because it is just a trilogy, I still think it was really great, and I really loved it. Like, of all the fantasy books that I read this year, this is the one that I have the biggest feelings about, and the one that I would most enjoy rereading. And if you have finished The Realm of the Elderlings and you're looking for some more Robin Hood, don't forget the Soldier Son trilogy. As I said, it doesn't have as high of an average rating as The Realm of the Elderlings, but I still think it's worth giving it a go, because maybe you'll love it like I did. Anyway, those are my top 10 fantasy books of the year. Let me know if you've read any of them, because I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments. And do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.